It's Sunday, February 12th, 2017, and this is the Product Mentor Talk. Today we're joined by one of our mentors, Frome, who does content and product over at Alpha, and he's going to lead a talk today on advocating for lean practices. Allow me to briefly explain the format for those of you who are joining us today. People you see along the bottom of your screen are mentors and mentees within the current session of the Product Mentor Program, and the Product Mentor Program takes place twice a year with 2 ginormous sessions. And each of those sessions, what we do is we pair up one mentor with one mentee in the field of product management to make better product people, and then hopefully all the better product decisions that then come out of that. And these are people all around the world: US, New York, Europe, Australia, all kinds of places. We got just a sampling of them down on the bottom of the screen. If guys, hey, everyone wave hello. There you can go. Everyone actually waved hello, despite the one person who seems to be sitting in the dark. He did wave hello for all of us. And so let me just quickly go around with introductions. I'll tell you a little bit more about myself and how to participate. But I'll just start with whoever's closest to me, and that would be Nis.
Hey, I'm Nis. I'll be giving the talk today, and you'll learn more about me in a moment.
Eric.
Hey everyone, my name is Eric Yang. I'm a PM at a company called Media Radar.
Are you a mentor or a mentee?
Oh, sorry, I'm a mentee. It's early.
And Chol.
Hey, how's it going? I'm Chol. I'm product manager at a startup called Inrijet, and I'm a mentee.
Excellent. And I am Jeremy Horn, also known as the product guy, and I'll be the moderator here today. And the way that works is as the questions are coming in, I will feed them to our mentor, our speaker today, in fairly real time. There'll be questions coming from all around. And in order to, if you're watching this, you're probably at theproductmentor.com/live. And if you're there, you'll see the video at the top of the screen. Along the bottom of the screen, you'll see the place to submit your questions. Make sure you attach your name to them so we know who you are. And so you'll submit your questions, and I'll pass them along as timely as possible. If it's a more generic question about what is product management or why am I here, those I will save till the end of the talk. The more topically appropriate, I'll get to them in real time. With all that said, with all that wonderful introduction, let me hand it over to Nis to take it away.
Thanks, Jeremy, and thanks, of course, for the opportunity to kick off this session. I think this is my third, potentially fourth talk, so excited to be doing this again. So this morning I'll be talking about becoming a lean advocate within your organization to help ship better products faster throughout your organization, specifically with your team and whatever you're working on, but being an advocate as well for just lean practices throughout your organization. I'm assuming by now most listeners are familiar with lean methodologies. If not, I'll go into it a little bit. So I'm Nis Frome. I'm working on a company called Alpha, where we essentially provide lean experimentation tools and a platform to Fortune 500 organizations. Typically, we work with a champion or an advocate already for lean within the organization. And what I spend most of my time doing is equipping these people with the resources, arguments, and data that they need to advocate for lean across other departments and other product managers, researchers, designers, C-suite, stuff like that. You might be familiar with some of the content my team has created. The podcast, This is Product Management. We do product management year in review of the top 40 people in product management, different articles and blog posts and newsletters as well. So let's talk about the objective for the talk. The big picture ultimately is to be lean, but it's not really a binary option here. It's not you're not either lean or not lean. It's more of a spectrum, and there's a lot in between. So to recap some of the lean methodologies, it's essentially the concept is that customer preferences are changing so quickly that any extensive planning you do, by the time you build a product on top of these plans, you'll learn that those plans were outdated, irrelevant, or just wrong to begin with. So what lean essentially does is it breaks whatever project you're working on into functional iterations. where you're testing assumptions at each step rather than only at the very end. So you're essentially de-risking the project, testing customer preferences along the way. So there's a lot kind of packed into those methodologies. And again, you're not either Kodak or Amazon. It's really a spectrum. And so when I talk about becoming a lean advocate, it's a revolution, and that's kind of the theme here, but it's really a revolution of baby steps. It's little things you do along the way. It's not an all or nothing proposition. That's also why advocacy is so important, because it's even little things can make a huge impact on your organization, on your team. Just want to be clear there that one of the common mistakes I see is that a lot of product managers do think it's an all or nothing proposition, and they try to get their company to change so much so quick, and they run into issues. So the challenge there, I kind of describe it as getting people to take their medicine. The challenge for bringing lean methodologies, which I think at this point most people agree, or virtually everyone agrees, are objectively better than the more traditional and classical product development lifecycle. The problem is that even if people agree it's better, it doesn't mean they're going to do it for a variety of reasons. One, and I think the primary reason, is that people aren't really incentivized to do it within many organizations. There's still a bias toward planning, a bias toward presentations, a bias toward opinions and talking. And there's not really an incentive to break things into functional iterations where you can't predict where they're going to lead you. It's kind of uncomfortable. So I describe advocating for lean and getting people to do lean as trying to get them to take their medicine where they don't see the obvious and immediate benefit. So on that note, on the concept of planning, the issue and why it's so difficult, again, the challenge here is that typically research cycles take a lot of months to do, and it's critically important if something is going to take 2 months that you plan to do it properly and that you plan it out correctly. But when you can break, as lean methodologies do, a lot of these processes into just hours or days, then iteration really eliminates the need for exhaustive planning. And that's the challenge there, is getting people to take that shift to iteration from planning. So the solution is, again, remember, it's a revolution of baby steps. The great thing about waterfall, which is the classical product development methodology where you do all your planning up front and then you execute it in stages. The great thing about it is that it's really, really obviously and fundamentally flawed in the modern day, where customer preferences change so much. There's a lot of interdependencies between what you're building and what competitors and partners and suppliers are building. So just as one quick example, if you were to spend 6 months planning and developing a new mobile app without getting any customer feedback, the entire operating system, if you're building an iOS app, the operating system is probably going to be different by the time you ship that app. So the entire thing is going to be outdated by the time you get to market. So this is a pretty obviously flawed approach, which is why the solution here is just finding the right situations to take simple initiatives and get easy wins. And you'll find, depending on where your company is on the spectrum we talked about earlier, that this is sometimes very, very easy. So in figuring out where to take those steps and get those easy wins, I look at kind of 3 areas to assess your organization, where they are on the spectrum and where you have room to improve. So those 3 areas are education, which is really the way your organization talks about product development, the way they think about it. Capabilities, that's kind of self-explanatory here, but what your organization can actually do and act on, given what they think and the way they talk. And then the last is examples, and that's really around what the education and capabilities have done for your company in the past, and whether it's worth doing or not doing those things again. So when we talk about education, I break it down into 2 aspects. There's messaging, which we'll talk about first, and then there's alignment, which I'll talk about next. So messaging is, it seems like semantics often, And sometimes it really is, but depending on your organization, semantics can matter a lot. If you're in a very large organization, it can be the difference between people blocking and bottlenecking what you're trying to do. And even in a small organization, impressions matter, and a founder can, buy into or not buy into something depending on the words you use. So some typical words that we use that there might be a better adaptation to is something like a product. When you say, the common thing in lean methodologies is the minimum viable product, which is, the quickest route to learning. It's some sort of stimuli you can put in front of your users or whoever you're putting in front of to get feedback and to iterate from there. It's a great term and it's a great concept, but using the word experiment instead of product is just one simple change that can relax a lot of the people around you. I think product comes with it a lot of connotations of, whoa, customers have an expectation when we ship a product or when we put a product in front of them of a certain quality and standard that our brand represents that it's going to have. And switching that word to experiment, in reality, what you're doing might be the exact same thing, but it just gets, it takes a lot of the risk out of it. If customers know it's an experiment, if your colleagues and stakeholders know it's an experiment, I've found that it's a better word. Other words I've seen people use are like a bet or, or something like that. So it takes away a lot of the connotation and the weight that comes with the word product. The second is using the word customer. Oftentimes the challenge, especially in B2B organizations, is that product managers don't really have access to the end customer. I know for healthcare companies, they don't always have access to a patient. Financial services companies, product manager doesn't always have access to clients. So sales teams can be very protective of their leads and their relationships for many good reasons, and I'm not going to get into that right now. But using instead of customer, going to a target demographic instead, what we sometimes call lookalike customer, a prospect, someone who could be a customer but isn't. That's it's not as rigorous as getting feedback from a customer, but it's still pretty good. And it's still quite a bit better than not getting feedback at all from customers. The next is guarantee. We like to use that word a lot. We like to assume that we are more confident in the data we have than we really are. And in reality, even in, doing academic statistics, it's not guarantee. It's all a matter of confidence and likelihood. So speaking in terms of which is more likely than the other is much better. It's actually more rigorous academically and professionally to speak more in terms of likelihood, and it's less likely to cause red flags when you guarantee something, especially if you're ever wrong on something you guarantee. That's kind of your reputation right there. And then the last is continuous versus here and there. Again, we aspire to do lean methodologies and get customer feedback continuously, but here and there is still better than not at all. So adapting to the messaging that will get people comfortable. So if you tell someone you're going to start doing this every day, that's kind of could be a red flag if they're not used to it, especially if they're not incentivized to do it. Here and there is much more comfortable and comforting. So the next part of education is really alignment. And I have these two graphics here and a whole bunch more graphics over at this article on the Next Web, which you can read. You can find this link afterward. So I'll expand on these two because I think they're important. So it's really hard to get alignment with different stakeholders within your organization. But if you think about it, it's essentially the role of a product manager to do exactly this. To have empathy for different stakeholders and align your objectives with their objectives. That's kind of the job. So I'll expand on just CEO and researcher because I find these two really interesting, especially for lean methodologies where both play crucial roles. But on the article in the Next Web, you can find out we also did representations for a CFO, an engineer, a sales manager, and a designer. So in the CEO, although it's not typically their job to execute experiments on a day-to-day basis, they do set the tone for the organization in terms of hiring, long-term objectives, acceptable behavior, and strategic investments. Therefore, it's important to explain the benefits of experimentation in terms they'll find instrumental. If you want your colleagues to have the incentives to do it, if you want the investment to be in place, the CEO is the person you need to speak to. It's surprisingly easy, and this is the way you would communicate to the CEO, telling them how surprisingly easy it is to get insulated from market demands, even when it seems everything is going well. Experimentation and lean really keeps challenging the organization's assumptions and gives employees a deeper understanding of their customers in order to uncover insights and opportunities to expand revenue. Not only that, but, and this is a good one that CEOs and the C-suite typically likes to hear, experimentation circumvents the cover your ass mentality that keeps many employees at large organizations from pursuing creative ideas and risks. Lean methodologies help to de-risk these activities, enabling teamwork and collaboration and yielding more engaged employees. So that's the way I would typically recommend you approach a C-suite, from that sort of angle. Not necessarily the getting deep into the weeds of the tactics, but more about, this is going to keep employees engaged with customers and aligned with customers, even when it seems all is going well. And it also circumvents the cover your ass mentality. For researchers, like developers and designers, researchers are natural champions of the experimentation mantra. However, researchers occasionally disagree with product managers regarding the necessary rigor by which user testing needs to be structured and evaluated. They tend to advocate for larger sample sizes and higher confidence intervals, which can marginalize the role of in-person interviews and quick surveys. They do this typically because traditional market research has long been done this way, and that's what they're often familiar with. So instead of ignoring these concerns and saying, it's user research for market versus market research and getting into that fight, it's really more helpful to just brush up on some of the fundamentals of statistics so that you can speak their language and collaborate to create research structures that are rigorous but also aligned with your business constraints. So instead of kind of brushing it off and setting traditional market research aside, try to learn to speak their language and maybe figure out how you can collaborate together. So those are the two that I think are important. But again, on the blog post, you can see how we suggest approaching CFO, engineers, sales managers, designers, different stakeholders who are really crucial in the lean advocacy and lean adoption. So next, I'm going to talk about capabilities. Remember, we're talking about assessing your organization for where there are opportunities to be a lean advocate and push your organization to kind of the next step on the spectrum of the lean revolution. And we talked about education in twofold. We talked about it in terms of messaging and in terms of alignment. And now we're going to talk about capabilities, which is the second of the three areas to assess. So in terms of capabilities, there's pretty much an infinite list. And if your organization is closer to Kodak on the spectrum, remember I had the spectrum of Kodak to Amazon, any of these is likely a gold mine of opportunity to level up on. So a popular one right now is design sprints, which is kind of being spearheaded right now by members of Google Ventures. Design sprint, it was the topic of my last talk, actually, which was a dedicated week to doing prototyping and putting assumptions to test and getting customer feedback on a variety of different areas that could inform your next few months of product development. Happy hours, surprisingly good way to get feedback from your target market, especially if you're in a B2B environment, inviting them to happy hours and just testing messaging. Something we do is like, I'll talk with someone else in my company and say, you pitch something one way, I'll pitch it another way. We'll each talk to 5 or 6 people at the happy hour, and let's kind of come back to this tomorrow and see, did we notice any patterns, any reactions, any differences between this, simple A/B test. Surveys are always a great way to get feedback. Of course, it's self-reported, it's not behavioral, but again, still better than nothing. And you can always do surveys on past behavior, are generally more accurate than surveys on, what you're asking someone to predict their future behavior. Interviews and going to customers' offices and learning about what they do and having that sort of cadence is really helpful. Having a prototyping capability where you can put design and stimuli in front of people and get their reaction. And then, of course, analytics, Google Analytics, Mixpanel, Intercom, stuff like that. There's so many different areas, and if you really do kind of a lay of the land and look at what your organization is doing versus not doing, unless you're a company like Uber or Amazon, which really has kind of robust lean capabilities where they can pick an industry and just disrupt it within a matter of weeks, you probably have a lot of room to grow in one or more of these areas at your organization. And again, where we talked about the spectrum before, there's such a benefit to any sort of leveling up that you do that it's worth it just incrementally improving one of these. So if it's something like you do happy hours once a year, but maybe you can do it 3 or 4 times a year, like that's a tremendous ROI that you can have for your organization. The last is examples, and this one's kind of interesting. So I like to talk about the double stuff Oreo example. I came into contact with a consultant who does focus groups, and focus groups have mostly fallen out of favor in product development for a variety of reasons, but nevertheless, this consultant had a lot of success. And I asked why, and I didn't really get such a great answer. But then when I saw them do a presentation of their capabilities and what they'd done in the past, what stuck out to me and what people talked about was the double stuffed Oreo, where essentially a focus group they spearheaded led to the double stuffed Oreo, which we're all familiar with, and I'm a huge fan of course, and is a very, very big product line hit. And what got me thinking was that they had this they had this story about the Oreo that anyone could relate to and really resonate with, in that it was something simple that everyone could understand. They could say, this consultant did the focus group that led to the double stuffed Oreo. It's as simple as that. It's an example that they had that now anyone could retell. And this is really important when you do lean. It's not just about it being objectively right. It's about showing these examples and these stories, these success stories that you have, that de-risks all of it and gives people an easy way to communicate the advantages and the benefits of lean methodologies. So when you think about anything you did, anything you learned from doing lean, kind of package that into your double stuff Oreo, into that story you can tell. So on that note, with regard to examples, in a lot of organizations, that's really more important than the methodology or anything like that. So I actually spoke to a head of user insights for, I'll say, one of the hottest tech companies right now, where we would typically think that, they're right on point with users. They have a great product. Everyone likes what they do. Even he told me that what gets funding in his organization isn't necessarily the assumptions that have been validated and the products and features have been validated. Instead, it's actually what looks best and what is like sexiest when it's presented to the C-suite for funding. So even in an organization like that, the examples and the stories matter the same amount, if not more, than the actual, arguments and logic and benefits of lean methodologies. So on that note, what a lot of companies do, even if they do the research and they're doing lean and they want to advocate for it throughout the organization, they still do things like a sizzle reel of showing the prototypes and the designs and the things that we know aren't necessarily part of lean, but are just look good. They focus a lot on that. They talk about the ROI, they talk about the numbers. We went from 2 failed projects last year that cost the company $2 million to, we killed 8 projects this year within the first month that could have saved us millions each. And then we validated 2 other opportunities that we wouldn't have got to if we had spent all of our time on the untested assumptions. And they socialize it internally. Just the water cooler talk is really important when we talk about advocating for lean methodologies. It's these little things we do, like, hey, did you hear what happened with the other team that did, prototype and got some feedback? They learned X where they really had thought it would have been Y. Crazy, right? And just these little examples can make lean really attractive within your organization. And then last, of course, this wouldn't be a lean presentation if we didn't talk about the customer quite a bit. They're the thread that really connects everything I've talked about together. At the end of the day, we're advocating, and lean is really about better serving them. So in anything you do in advocating for lean, you've got to bring the customer to life. If you've got, and I talk about this a lot, like showing a survey of 1,000 respondents, from your user group saying X versus Y, it's interesting. But, that's kind of a statistic. I don't know who these people are. But when you show just one video of one person saying one thing about how the product changed their life, or how it's getting in the way, or how they've been challenged by it, that really brings them to life. And that is really powerful, because anyone in a meeting who has an opinion and they want to argue with what that customer is saying on a video, quite frankly, they kind of look like a jackass when they do that, because there's only so many times you can say that the user is wrong, or that they don't know what they're talking about, before everyone else in the room is like, no, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, this is what the user is saying. So really bringing the customer to life, if that's like the one thing you do from this presentation, I think is the most important thing. Just simple videos, a simple quote. These are things that really resonate with the C-suite. And it's really difficult for anyone to argue with. So the next step really is your turn. So identify the opportunities within your organization, whether it's education, capabilities, or examples, to apply lean methodologies and champion the successes to advocate for wider adoption. So that is my talk for today.
Outstanding. Thank you, Nis. And again, thanks, Nis, Frome, content and product over at Alpha. It's a really great talk, a lot of great advice, especially for those of you picking up, kind of trying to get lean adopted in your company, especially that slide on using different terminology, and the messaging that you use should go really a long way. It's really just the whole overall discussion on advocating lean practices. And as always, the presentation will be posted to our SlideShare channel. And a big thank you from me, Jeremy Horn, the product guy, and everyone else who joined us today in the Product Mentor. And also don't forget, if you're interested in being a product mentor like today's speaker, Nis, to product people of all sorts all around the world, we're in over 20 different countries, please visit theproductmentor.com and sign up today. We're always looking for more mentors. And also, if you're looking to fill a new product job with a great product person, visit our very own free-for-all job board at theproductjobs.com. And with all that said, thanks, and see you guys all next time. Bye.